Hello, and welcome to the show, Mystery Go and the Feral Monk. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a special guest. Mr. Just is joining us. He's also from living in North Carolina, not too far down the road from where I'm at here in Greensboro. And of course, Mr. Monk's coming at us from Zurich, Switzerland. Thank you guys for joining me today. Today's episode number 8, and we're going to be talking about values. Basically, values are, of course, what we deem to be important in life. And there's a couple different ways, a million different ways, actually, that you can go about thinking about values. We've got them from kind of like an innate sense of values that we have that are just kind of present, that we just kind of know inside, and then we've also kind of got like shared values, or also kind of like learned values. Actually, it's not like shared values, but yeah, like core values would be more like shared values. But yeah, the learned values, I guess, would kind of dictate basically what we've experienced in life. And based on those experiences, those kind of shape and inform our value system. So, Mr. Monk, do you want to help me, get this kicked off and tie this in maybe with some of our previous episodes, recap this a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, we've moved on in a very nice trajectory. Like we talked about last time, we've moved through sort of the development of mythology and philosophies, mythologies emerging through heroic personalities and great deeds in the past, into mythological stories that are then further informed with a sense of moral behavior. And out of those develop philosophical traditions and come personalities and teachers that then try to give away or offer a way for people to live out their mythological aims. Mythological also being included that with religious aims. And what we're talking about in the end of that is sort of like a type of conditioning. Whenever you add those all of the environmental factors together and all of the internal factors together, you develop sort of a feedback loop of conditioning that develops. And in that conditioning arise, just as those mythologies arise out of culture, or philosophies rise out of religious and mythological traditions, those values then arise out of that conditioning. And so those values tend to be exactly as the word denotes. It's a place of worth. It's placing worth on certain types of actions or thoughts or feelings. So values, I see values being maybe first and foremost, you have sort of social values, things that we agree upon to a larger or lesser extent as a greater society, on where we like to put worth and value on certain actions and attitudes. Then you also have individual ones, which then takes on, you still have the conditioning, the social conditioning present that's informing it, but at the individual level, you also have the matrix of experiences that you've accumulated. And so maybe in an example, there might be a social value that you experienced in your own life to not necessarily really have any worth to it. And so your individual value might then supersede, you might be inclined then to go against that social value. Then I think once we can get to that point of sort of a very simplistic way of looking at what values are, then we have to then start to talk about how values are applied, because that's where the actual where the actual events take place, is whenever your internal values, informed as they may be with conditioning and personal experience, whenever they meet others in a social setting with their conditionings and their experiential things. Whenever those values come together, sometimes they align, sometimes they don't. When they don't, then we have a lot of the problems with society. Whenever they do align up, then we end up with sometimes very beautiful forms of cooperation. Sometimes we can also cooperate with other like minds in a negative way.
Absolutely. So yeah, Mr. Just Is. I mean, you're here today to kind of share your experience and your work and what you're doing. Do you want to tell us a little bit of background about what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, guys. Mr. Monk, Mr. Go. Yeah, so values, I mean, as with most of your sessions, you're talking about things that are very broad. So,
Yes.
what are values? What is justice, and these sorts of questions that I think are, internal to perception and definition. I was just kind of thinking, and it's been a while since I thought about this, but I wrote this like life skills workbook, which is hilarious coming from me to write about life skills, which I don't even know if I have all of them, in check personally, but I work with juveniles that have behavior issues. Some or most even charged criminally. But I was thinking back about how values change. It's an ebb and flow, and it's so fluid because from the age 0 to 5, what you value is going to change drastically, right? So when you're in that time period of life, you value mama's milk, you value playtime, you value snuggling, whatever. And then from 5 to 10, it's going to change. It's going to be like a certain cereal that you like. You gotta have that cereal every morning. And then 10 to 15 is a huge change. Hormonally, emotionally, behaviorally, whatever.
I'm
And
a
then,
stepdaughter, so yeah, I understand that.
yeah, and you can see where I'm going with this, and then, so you get your first pet, you're responsible for that pet. Then you have a child, you're responsible for that child. So your values constantly change and your worldview constantly changes. So, I mean, you can't just nail down values. However, my thought on values is that we all share something. No matter how you think, from a cultural perspective, political perspective, we all innately want a lot of the same things in life, whether you're part of Al Qaeda or ISIS, or you're a Mormon or you're a Buddhist, right? I mean, we all want intrinsically the same sort of things in life. And, it's deep. I mean, we could talk about this, forever, but I just, your values change, but initially, or not initially, but essentially, I think humans just, want goodness and fairness, and it's a fucked up world, man. We're all trying to attain the same thing from way different sides. So I don't know.
I think you touched on exactly that kind of difference. Now we have some types of values that maybe do change. I don't think those core values change. I do think that that we do have some types of values that change completely. Some of them also are just evolving. Some of them are just becoming more informed over time, and so they may become more nuanced, and so they change in the form of nuance. I think the ones that tend to be very changeful tend to be social values, and as the society itself changes its perspective on how it feels about certain things, then those values tend to change along with them. Like my mother-in-law, she fought for gay rights here in Switzerland quite vehemently, and was a big part of that whole movement. And that was something that was a value, it used to be a value of the society, that was an immoral action. And then over time, I think a lot of that had to do with the homosexual community being more open about their sexual preference, and average everyday people who had this implanted social value that it's an immoral action, then interacted with these people consciously because they were open about it. And then that conscious interaction led them to discover that they're human beings like everyone else, and that it shouldn't matter whether you're in a love relationship with someone of the same gender or of another gender. And so that would be like sort of a value that is a social value that changed and then informed individual values and changed those individual values. I think if people were more in touch with their core values, it would have never been a problem from the beginning. And that would be more my perspective, is that we have these very deep core values, these innate values that aren't a part of conditioning. And those tend not to change. Those tend to be values on things such as love, or on compassion, or being helpful to another person, or cooperate, any type of cooperative endeavor. And I think, I can't remember the intellectual that said this, but I think the quote is something along the lines that if the entirety of human evolution were based on power and on domination, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
That human beings needed cooperation as well in order to achieve the things that they've achieved. And so maybe those innate values are something we should focus more on as a society, instead of being often caught in the superficial or superfluous fringes of our social contracts.
Yes, absolutely. I think you kind of bring up an interesting point, or brings to mind an interesting point about when, we face, the difficult situations in life where our value system comes up against another one, usually maybe a societal one that we don't necessarily agree with. So I wanted to ask Mr. Is, because I know recently you mentioned to me a pretty relevant story where you came across that in your work. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Talking about the school resource officer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so I work with juveniles that have, well, backtrack. So I get referrals. I run a restorative justice program called Restorative Circle Program. Restorative justice looks at justice in a different way. So the criminal legal system looks at what law was broken, who did it, and how to punish them. Restorative justice looks at who was harmed, who caused the harm, how to repair that harm. So basically, I get referrals from juvenile justice, which is basically jail and detention for minors up to the age of 17. And then I get referrals from schools, which is awesome because sometimes not always, but sometimes they'll refer them to me instead of juvenile justice. So they're not in that system. And that's what I'm trying to do, is keep them out of that system to begin with. I do like getting referrals from juvenile justice. It's a different way to look at, how to approach their behavior. But essentially what I want to do is keep them out of that system altogether.
Okay.
But recently, it was actually in the same week, I had a school counselor reach out to me and say that there were some concerns about having a circle, which is basically a discussion on how we address the behavior without labeling this kid as bad, right?
Right.
There was some concern that he might be violent during that process. So the counselor said, can the school resource officer be present? And I said, if he or she wants to show up as a person of support for this child, by all means. But if that SRO needs to be there from a security standpoint, absolutely not. And if they do want to participate as a person of support to this child, they have to check their gun. And I just kind of stood my ground, and she never even responded. She never said anything. We went there, and the SRO wasn't present. So I guess I got that message to some degree. What we do is peaceful process, and just having a gun there is intimidating. And then even in the officer in uniform is intimidating. So I really don't care for them to be there unless they want to put on some.
I would imagine it makes it difficult for the child to then trust you. No, it's going to make your job more difficult because there's a person there that is exemplifying. They're showing that there is no trust in the child.
Exactly.
They're there because they don't trust the kid.
Yeah. Yeah, and that particular kid, man, he cusses like a sailor, like every other word. And we took about 2.5 hours for that circle. And he had teachers there that he had conflict with, particular conflict with a couple teachers. And dude did cuss one time, and they finally got to listen to each other, because that can't happen in the classroom all the time. There's, so much going on. Plus, it's an alternative school, so all of these kids have been criminally charged. So they've been kicked out of regular high school. They call them alternative schools. And these teachers and this kid, they got to listen to each other, hear each other out, what they needed. And one of the teachers was like, his name's Ivan. They were like, Ivan, you haven't cussed 2 hours. Like, what's going on? And I was like, I told you this is a peaceful process. Just something about it by sitting in circle. Like, it's just, we have some ground rules that we go over beforehand, no yelling, shaming, blaming, whatever. But yeah. The other instance, called the officer who actually sent the referral to me, Officer Brown. I know him pretty well. And, I asked him to participate, and he was like, yeah, I'd really like to do that. I was like, all right, well, so we're doing it at this, this park, and, bring a lawn chair and whatever. And I was like, make sure you leave your gun in your car. He's like, what? I was like, yeah, you gotta check your gun, man. And he was pissed. He's like, I'm a peace officer. I can bring this gun on. I'm exempt to bring this gun with me anywhere. I was like, well, I'm sorry, but we have a policy. He's like, my policy overrides your policy. I was like, well, no, sorry, it doesn't. It was like, if you want to participate, you gotta check your gun, and otherwise, I'm sorry, but you can't join. And he pretty much went off on me, said it was bullshit. It was just, thank you for asking, Matt. But yeah, it's just a time where like my values superseded policy, and that policy was actually my policy. I just said it was our policy as a nonprofit. We do have at our office, we have a sign that says no weapons allowed, in this building or whatever. But I don't know. I just made it kind of my own. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's just something that you're making your own. I think that is a completely legitimate and natural response to trying to develop a peaceful environment in order to have this type of conversation with the child. And that is just conscious preparation, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that that's so important, you know, and you know, what really stuck out to me, because I didn't hear, you know, part of that story last time you told it to me, but the kid didn't cuss when you guys, you know, kind of respected him and, you know, kind of met him at his level and didn't bring in this intimidating force into the situation. Then you kind of have pretty positive results, I would say.
Absolutely.
I just think that there's a lot to learn from that. And, you know, there's a lot of unrest going on in the United States right now. And the police killings is just out of control. And I think that, you know, the stuff going on in Minnesota is really, really sad. And I hate to see it. And the police and now the National Guard presence there is somewhat militaresque, and it's not the right answer. These people need to be heard, and it's going to have to be some change.
Yeah, definitely. And their reaction being electrified with anger and all of these types of things, I can completely understand and sympathize with that situation. My own personal take on everything is that, unfortunately, these are examples of conditioned values and conditioned certain types of conditionings clashing in the actual social realm, and it's very difficult to have the proper nuanced conversation that is most likely to find good solutions to those problems, because people are acting on those conditioned and conditionings and conditioned values unchecked, without thinking over them twice on both sides of the issue. And because of that, you're stuck in exactly the types of things that Mr. Is was avoiding in that situation: the blaming, the shaming, the hyperbolic language, intimidation, all of these types of things. And so we're escalating our situations. We're not trying to find or reach our core values that we have in common, but rather we're caught on a much more self-defensive, superficial level with the situation. You know, like I would have to say, you know, if to be honest, and it's the only thing I can do, I would have to say that not every one of those situations has been justified, and not every one of those situations was unjustified. You know, to be in a very fair situation, there are a lot of very complex dynamics that have to be cleaned up before any real genuine progress is going to be made. And the people who I feel are the most responsible for exacerbating the situation are the media and the political narratives. And that type of current conditioning, which is like, you know, finding its way into our minds 24 hours a day, through 24-hour news cycles, and, you know, depending on the channel you're watching, they're backing a certain side of the story. And at the same time, you know, no one is choosing to talk about core values that we can build upon. And I would urge everyone to, not just in the cheesy way of like Black History Month, let's reflect on Martin Luther King Jr., but in a very real way. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s time, as you know, Matt, with the screenplay and stuff that you were developing, there were two prevailing narratives in the Black community of how to fight the injustices that they were experiencing. One of them armed and one of them passive. And the armed way was a little bit of a any means necessary. And I'm not trying to degrade it in that, because that has value. Sometimes things need to be done by any means necessary. And the other half of that was trying to call that core value of human dignity to the front. And that was Martin Luther King Jr.'s version. It is within our human dignity to not do these types of things to each other based on something like race, with his famous line of imagining in the future a day when his children or grandchildren will be judged on the content of their character and not on the color of their skin. And character is something very close to core values. Unfortunately, at the moment, are because of how information is displayed and presented and utilized and manipulated and twisted, and things that the media and the political narratives are not serving us as a population of how to find these restorative justice components in our society. We're both trying to execute some type of form of personal criminal justice. And we're not looking, just to draw on the analogy and the work that Mr. is doing. We're not working on restorative justice as a society right now. We're implementing two different kinds of criminal justice philosophy against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Mr. Monk basically gave us some good explanation there. And I guess I would like for you to talk some more about the difference you're talking about with the criminal, right? What you're calling the criminal justice system, and that's what they call it, right? And but you were saying that wasn't very accurate.
Yeah. And if you hear conversations, whether it's through a podcast, I listen to NPR all the time. You'll hear a lot of people that work in the or work around even the legal system, in or outside, as I do. I work within it, but not for it. But you'll hear people saying the criminal legal system a lot more these days. They just take the word justice out of it because who's the justice for? People that have money to pay for their so-called justice. In kind of going back to what Mr. Monk was saying about the MLK quote about the content of character instead of the color of the skin, right? So that would require that we hold assumptions back, because we all make assumptions about each other. I try to check myself every day. It's a difficult thing, man. It's something you have to work on. And, I make assumptions living where I live, mostly about other white people. And
fuck Whitey.
What's that?
I said, fuck Whitey. Sorry.
Yeah. white people, man. God. But yeah, so we make assumptions, but instead of people looking at someone's character, first thing they see is their skin color. So that that automatically takes away from any character that they have, any good innate value that they bring to this world. And everybody has value,
I think you hit something very, very deep there about assumptions. Assumptions is that conditioning, is that problem that we have. Like the thing about holding your assumptions back is about holding that ego back, is about holding that, like, that me or I that thinks it knows everything and definitely knows the best way to do everything, you know, and
Very true.
Kind of a non sequitur, but along the same lines, I wanted to get you to expound upon one of your statements that I've heard you make frequently, Mr. Is, and it's one of those little statements that can be kind of cliche or just one of those easy platitudes, like a one-liner, but there's something behind it, and I think it's relevant to the subject. I've heard you often say that hurt people hurt people, and so when that comes in, when we're talking about values, how do you think we break that chain? How do we break that system of people that have been hurt and that have, trauma in their lives, in their past or present? How do we get them, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. That's a difficult question to answer, and it's a difficult thing to do. But hurt people. It's very true, and it's complicated. But I mean, in my work, the only thing I can really point to, is love and compassion and I never so let me just try to explain this. When I first when I learned about restorative justice, I was getting my master's degree in peace and conflict studies. I knew I wanted to do something with it, whether it was race dialogue, diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever. I mean, there's so many things I wanted to do to try to help this world become better, make myself become better, make people around me become better, right? But I ended up starting a new program with a nonprofit called the Conflict Resolution Center. And, when I went to this, it's called the International Institute of Restorative Practices, or IIRP. And they're like this overarching restorative justice institute that everyone's just like, oh, IIRP is the end all be all of restorative justice. And they had trainings all over the country and the world. It's this like box chain restorative justice thing that I used to just think was amazing, because it told you exactly what to do step by step. This is how restorative justice works. You ask this question and this question and this question, and then in the end, you're going to have this kumbaya moment and everyone's going to walk away happy. And that's just not the reality. Not at all. So they have these guidelines and these values that they give you. They literally have a card, like a business card that says, like on one side ask these questions, and the other side to the offender, and then the other side asks these questions to the victim. Well, there's no clear-cut victim offender all the time. Sometimes yes, but mostly not.
Right.
And that goes back to the hurt people, right?
Yeah.
So the kid that's been bullied for years finally throws a punch because he's tired of it or she's tired of it. Then they're the offender because they get the assault charge. Okay, so they were a victim for years, right? So going back to values, when I first started running this program and doing these circles, I read, the script, and I quickly learned, like, this is kind of BS. Like, every person is different, So I learned to, first of all, slow the process down. Second, learn to have a relationship. Without relationship, I'm not going to get any buy-in or trust from these kids. So now, like, I went to group home the other day, to to have a conversation with one of my referrals. This kid's been through shit his entire life. Shit. Sexually abused by an adoptive father who's now in prison for 17 years because of it. Thrown away when he was a child, neglected. DSS took him away from his parents when he was 5 because he was physically abused. I mean, this kid has been through so much shit. 13 years old, no, 15 years old. And talking with him, he just basically told me that he doesn't see any future. He hates his life. So anyway, I went to go talk to him about his comments to me in a previous conference. And there's a foosball table in there, in the little room we went in, and they were recording. They told us they were being recorded. And I was like, hey, you get to play foosball? He's like, no. He's like, I don't have enough points this week, because everything's based on the points as to whether you can do or not do certain activities, right? He got in trouble. He brought a vape. He was throwing rocks. He's always doing something, seeking attention, if you will. But so I was like, well, maybe they'll let us play, because I'm here. So he was like, just go ask. And opened the door and said, can Chris and I play foosball? And they're like, yeah, do whatever you want. So we went to go play foosball. They didn't have any foosball balls. They were all ping pong balls, which are, they're so light, you can't even, they just bounce out immediately. So it took us half an hour to, play this ball with all the ping pong balls flying out. So I don't even know why I'm telling the story, but anyway, I bought them some proper foosball balls, and I'm going to take them there. I don't know.
You were talking about establishing a relationship and how important it is to establish a relationship with the child in order to gain their trust and the ability to really go deeper into that conversation. So that would be an example of realizing in that moment, hey, let's play some foosball. Or, oh, you don't even have any foosballs. I'm going to bring them by. He doesn't even know that yet. And the moment whenever they come by and they get delivered, or the next time that he sees you or whatever, there's already another step of trust. There's already another, it might not be monumental. It might still be a hesitant trust, but it's the beginning of those relationships, that you were talking about, and the importance of those relationships.
Yeah. And it's that, it reminds me of what you were asking, Mr. Go, that love, that compassion, so, and that goes back to values, what are your values? So as an organization, the nonprofit for which I work, I decided I wasn't going to go by the scripted values that this IRP came up with. And they're a great organization. I'm not trying to knock them, but they don't talk about, they don't train you in a way that's restorative necessarily. But we changed our values. So I asked all my volunteers, name your top 5 values. And then, after they all came back to me, I took the most widely used values, and then I inserted a couple of my own. I do run the program, so why not? But and love is one of those. You have to love these kids. You have to immerse yourself in their lives and find their value. So
what we're talking about is hurt people, right? So, and what we're trying to do is change the behavioral outcome, stop hurting people. And so if hurt people, then how do we actually stop them from hurting? That's what that is in the end. If you want to stop them from hurting other people, how do you stop them from hurting them, inside? Yes. And you're going to do that with love, because they haven't had that. You're going to do that with patience and kindness, because they haven't ever seen that or experienced that. You're going to do that with these other core values. And what's interesting, I was wondering if we would get to a point in the conversation about this, but what's interesting is these types of things, they come as like a natural response when you're present. You're consciously involved in this process, so it's not something you can sleepwalk through. It's something that you have to be conscious while you're there, and then that conscious presence is allowing for the correct response, the correct ethic, the correct value to be applied in that moment. And part of the thing that we dislike, or this artificial feeling about pre-scripted values, is because we've all experienced dynamic moments in our life where it's just not black and white, where there's a lot of gray in between, and the gray is also a part of that reality, and can't just be so easily dismissed, seeing that it's the majority of the spectrum.
Yes, absolutely.
Anything
else you wanted to add before we sign off?
I do, yeah, if you don't mind. Going back to how I realize the value of values, if you will, and what I do. I work with another organization called Talking Peace out of Oakland, California.
Yes.
Gentleman by the name of Eric Butler started this organization after bringing restorative justice practice into Oakland Unified School District. He's amazing, does amazing work. He's the one that pretty much, I guess, opened my eyes to how important values are. And part of what they do besides restorative justice in schools is race dialogue. And I love having those conversations, especially, especially today with, so much going on around race and white supremacy. And, those conversations are important to have. So I guess that's what's kind of opened my eyes to values, and that we all have, some commonly shared values and whatnot, but, either way, certain values are more important to you than others. And sometimes to have those conversations, especially around race, which can be difficult for anyone in any color of skin, it's important to recognize that, the humanity and others, that we share values, no matter how we get there, from a personal perspective or a policy perspective or whatever. But I just want to give a shout out to Eric Butler for that, and Talking Peace. You can find them at talkingpeace.org. They're also on Instagram and Facebook, of course. But we're doing some really important work, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned Eric, because he's taught me a lot, so much more than IIRP. And I don't mean to knock IIRP, but man, when I found Talking Peace, I was like, man, these guys are for real. Like, they know how this works. They actually work with kids that have had layers and layers of trauma, from a young age. Yeah, it's awesome what they're doing. So I just wanted to get that plug real quick to Talking Peace, and it's Peace, PEAC.
No doubt, man. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, I remember you sharing about Eric Butler, and I sat in on one, if not two, of those little Zoom things. And he's doing great work. So definitely check out Eric Butler. Just want to say thanks again for taking time out, Mr. Monk and Mr. Is.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Monk and Mr. Go. This is awesome.
Yeah, it was great. I hope we get to do this a little more often, huh?
Yeah.
You were a great person to talk with today. A great guest, just like Maddie said.
I gotta admit, I was a little nervous, man, watching Eric Castellano. I was like, that was some deep thoughts.
Oh, you haven't seen the one with Mr. Connor yet?
No, I haven't seen Jeb yet.
Yeah, we got to get Bob. We got to get Bob eventually. He's coming over to visit Tuesday. But yeah, I'm gonna try to talk him into doing something eventually.
Cool.
Anyone that wants to be on the show, hit me up.
Mm.
But yeah, thanks again, Mr. Mr. Monk, and everybody out there for listening and watching. Sign off and make sure everybody takes care of themselves and be kind to one another. Peace.
Word. Peace.